what is Arti? And Arti is basically our hospital chatbot. So we thought, would we be able to use the latest artificial intelligence technologies to actually give a bit of a character to the hospital and something which the children could interact with, actually ask questions to? And that was the inspiration for our chatbot. And over the years, we've tried to come up with good names for it, and Arti is the name which we come up with, which stands for artificial intelligence. What it is for those little questions that people have, which actually they get often very, very worried about, very anxious about. They can just ask any time of the day. And these are answers which we have taught the artificial intelligence to give back. These are answers which we want to give as a hospital. It's not some random thing which has been brought in over Google. So that's why we've created it. I've personally found it very fascinating to read the questions which they've been asking, because they've ended up asking questions that I've never been asked before as a person, because I must be a big scary surgeon, a big scary doctor. And clinic's often a stressful environment. But when in the comfort of their own home and start asking questions, they start answering different things, and it gives you a bit more of an insight into what's actually making people worried. And if you can fix that, then you make their time in hospital much better. Yeah, so one of my favourite ones was, why are you putting me to sleep for this operation? Why don't you just wait until tonight? I thought that was really lovely, but also quite creepy in a way, and that I would sneak into their bedroom and operate on them. But that was interesting. And the other one was around how actually the term "go to sleep" is a very bad term to use with children, because they associate going to sleep with waking up. And they're all terrified of waking up during the operation. And one of the most common questions coming through is, but looking just at surgery, we do the artificial intelligence for all sorts of different things. It's not just about surgery, it's about how you get to the hospital, it's about medications and what you can eat and where you can park and that type of thing. But the kids are often asked, will I wake up, will I wake up, will I wake up? And so I've now incorporated that into my practice now, that even if a child doesn't ask me about it, I tell them, you're not going to wake up during this operation. Another thing which I learned really early in my career is, this is in a different hospital, this wasn't Alder, we had a child who'd been sent to us from a foreign hospital who couldn't manage this child's condition. And we fixed this child, but when we went to send them back to that country, that hospital had closed and they couldn't take him back. And there was nowhere we could send him that could safely look after him. So he stayed and lived with us for 8 years in this ward. And he became like part of the furniture practically. And we would use him to speak to other children. So he would always do the tour. So I always say, Danny, made up name, go and have a chat to so-and-so and just tell him what it's like to be an MRI scan. And that was just perfect. It was an 8-year-old boy giving it just the right level. He was an expert, but he wasn't a scary, intimidating doctor. And so the concept of trying to give information at a different level, try not to be hierarchical or patronising about the way you give information. I think that's really important in how you give information out. There's things which children don't vocalise. So I remember I once had this teenager, and she was always very unhappy, and she'd had an operation where we'd reconstructed her abdominal wall. So she'd born with her insides and her outside, and we put it all back in and reconstructed the abdominal wall over the top. But the problem with it was that she had quite a big scar on her tummy, and she was always getting abdominal pain from it, and she also seemed very unhappy, and we could never get to the bottom of it. And we finally coaxed it out of her, and she said, I'm just really sad about the fact that I'll never be able to have children in the future. And then I said, well, why do you think that? She says, well, I don't have a belly button. I need a belly button for the baby to connect to. And I was like, no, the baby needs a belly button. You don't need a belly button. And then it was like, we never saw her again practically after that. It was just that thought that had been ruminating in her head, that she'd never been brave enough to vocalise, or felt stupid about talking about it. That I can't say for sure, but I wonder if we'd had a chatbot that you could have sat at 10 o'clock at night and just asked that question, would that have picked it up? And picked it up earlier, or even if it's just, we'd be able to ask us like, look, just give us a list of questions that you're worried about, and then we can quickly answer it for you. I mean, I even had one little lad who he'd come with a foreskin problem, basically, and we couldn't get him into the room. Nice little 9-year-old, but he just refused to go in the room and all the rest of it, and it took us about an hour to finally coax him into the room and examine him. And then at the end of all that, he was like, "Is that it?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's it." And what happened was his big brother had convinced him that I was going to take a big pair of scissors and cut it off in clinic. So I think he was quite rightly nervous. So if we'd known before that that's what he was worried about, we could have told him, "Look, it's okay, I'm unarmed, I'm just looking." Then we could have avoided an hour of backwards and forwards to the thing. So there's a resource implication to making sure you've addressed people's concerns as well. So looking at how advanced the chatbot is compared to previous innovations in healthcare, I mean, the basic premise of it, of answering questions, is not that complicated when you think about it. But then when you actually look at the science behind getting a computer to understand what a human is saying and what they mean by what they say, that is really something else. And I didn't realise just how complicated it was until we started looking at the mechanics of what's underneath the hood of these natural language platforms. Because it's right, the way we speak as humans is incredibly confusing. So if you went to a person and said, take that plane and fly over the ship with a red bow, you would know what they meant. Whereas the computer would be like, what, a red bow and arrow, a red bow tie, a red bow, what do you mean? Do you mean the bow of a ship? Probably. It's like, it's just very, very vague. With the way we speak is, there's a lot of implied rules to it and assumptions, and computers are not great with that. Well, they never used to be great with it. And that's what this new emerging technology has done. It's started to be able to understand what on earth we're actually speaking about, because we create information in what's called an unstructured way. When I give you a set of options, I don't give you a spreadsheet of columns and datas and values. I'll speak in this kind of unstructured sort of way, and it's how can computers understand that information and then make use of it, because the data we're creating these days is largely unstructured, but there's value in it if we could figure out how to extract it. So on the surface it's quite simple, answering questions, simple questions. Then once you start to try it, deep down into it, you see these massive computers and decades of research which have gone into creating these platforms.